To speak.
Hey, how's everyone feeling out there today? Welcome to Student Affairs Live. I am your host, Tony Doody, and I'm pleased to be joining you from my professional home at Rutgers University. We broadcast on the Higher Ed Live network. You can tune in to Student Affairs Live along with my good friend and colleague, Heather Shea Gasser, who is also appearing live with us today as a guest, every other Wednesday this spring at 12 o'clock Eastern Time. In a moment, I'll introduce you to our distinguished panel, but we can't do that without first giving a shout out to the sponsors that make Student Affairs Live possible. Higher Ed Live is sponsored and produced by M. Stoner, a marketing and communications firm that works with education institutions on branding, strategy, web design, and more. Student Affairs Live is also sponsored by ACPA, College Student Educators International. ACPA's strategic partnership with Higher Ed Live calls attention to the pairing of innovative professional development delivery with the strength of a renowned professional association. ACPA publishes the Journal of College Student Development and About Campus. Join ACPA in Tampa this March for our annual convention by clicking on the link we're tweeting out now. Now, you can join us and the conversation today on Twitter using the Higher Ed Live hashtag. Today's back-channel DJ, mixing it up and bringing you the latest and greatest hits, is Rutgers' very own Interim Director of Leadership, Robin Janice. You can meet Robin this year at ACPA in Tampa as she coordinates this year's Pachaka-Cha Talks. She recently authored a great post on Pachaka-Cha, which I'm tweeting out now, and every time I say Pachaka-Cha, an angel will get its wings. Pachaka-Cha. Finally, I am pleased to have join me today three people that make me smile whenever I hear their voice. They have been presenting on the topic positive psychology to a standing room crowd for the last 2 years at the National ACPA Conference. They are smart, they are fun, they enjoy long walks on the beach at sunset. Keith, Grant, Heather, welcome to our show today.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, Tony.
So can I have each of you take a brief moment to introduce yourself with your name, title, and what makes you smile and why? We'll start off with Keith.
My name is Keith Edwards. I'm the Director of Campus Life at McAllister College in St. Paul, Minnesota. And I think what makes me smile is, actually, I'll change it up already. We're going to break a lot of rules. That's part of the fun. I'm going to talk about what makes me cry, because when I see communities come together, when I see people sticking up for those who don't have the power or are less than them, it makes me cry with pride and joy and happiness. So for me, my tears are bigger than my smile.
Great. Thank you. And Grant, let's go to you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Grant Anderson. I'm an Assistant Director of Residential Life at the University of Minnesota, Twin Cities. I have been here for 12 years, and the things that make me smile are probably my partner, my kids, and then the humor I find in the constant mistakes I make, or as I like to think of them as learning moments.
Very good. All right, Heather, how's it feel to be a guest and not a host today?
Oh my gosh, this is actually making me smile today. This is awesome. Thanks for the opportunity, Tony. As you said, my name is Heather Shea Gasser. I work as the Assistant Director of the Residential Initiative on the Study of the Environment, or RISE program here at Michigan State University. And I'm also a full-time doctoral student in the HALE program. The things that make me smile, I would agree with Grant and definitely my children. It's amazing what a 7-year-old and a 10-year-old can come up with, and just makes you roll on the floor. So that makes me smile. I think also the students that I interact with on a daily basis here at MSU, and some of my colleagues and classmates, and my former classmates, Keith and Grant. That's I don't know if that was in the introduction, but we went to school together, so
nice.
Good to be here.
Class reunion. Excellent.
Go Rams. That's right.
Go Rams.
So I can see we've got a great viewership out here today, so certainly a popular topic, just like it has been at the national conferences. Grant, can you start us off by talking, kind of defining what positive psychology is? It's such a broad topic. I'm not quite sure people understand the components or the foundation for the phrase.
Well, you know, I think it's probably something that I'm not sure. I don't have a PhD in positive psychology, but I think the three of us have spent the better part of the last 5 or 6 years really trying to understand this and how we can bring it into our work. In short, I think the concept is about it's an academic field of study focused on how we can essentially increase our level of happiness, well-being, thriving, or flourishing in our lives. Traditionally, psychology is focused on thinking about the ways in which people are struggling or suffering and how to get them back to a place of functioning or normality for them. Well, positive psychology is research focused on how we can help ordinary people make the most out of their lives, both personally and professionally. This field is about 2 decades old in terms of its kind of current form, although it's based on research over decades before that as well. Some focuses of this really are resiliency, positive emotion, engagement, and then really overall quality of life. Those are some themes that come through in a lot of the research. I think a big part of positive psychology is really a paradigm shift, away from thinking about what doesn't work, what's broken, and really focused on how can we understand the best of who we are and who we can become, and learning that through the research. One thing I do want to point out, though, it's not about denying, though, that there is struggle, that there is pain, that there are challenges. For example, I think injustice and oppression are very real challenges that I know all 3 or all 4 of us really care about. And positive psychology isn't just ignoring those things that are hard. What it says, though, is that to really create change or to do things, we need energy, resiliency, community, and engagement. And positive psychology can give us the tools to fight things like injustice and oppression and work towards things like liberation. And so it's not about just kind of rose-colored glasses and pretending challenges aren't there. It can actually provide a way to work through challenges by focusing on what works best in both people, organizations, and in systems of doing things.
Wow, that is a great explanation, and it's clear why so many people are interested. It's so integral to all our work in student affairs. Now, Heather, a lot of people get confused or don't make a distinction between positive thinking and positive psychology. Can you explain the difference for us?
Yeah, for sure. And excuse me if some of what I say overlaps a little bit with Grant, but I'll just reinforce some of his points. As he said, positive psychology is an evidence-based field of scientific inquiry. It's looking at the science of human emotions, where positive thinking is more of a self-helpy, multi-million, billion-dollar industry, where we're really talking about kind of the don't worry, be happy, the 7 habits, the secret, the Tony Robbins people who have made millions of dollars as life coaches, self-help authors, but don't base their work in scientific study or knowledge. So as Grant said, positive psychology is a discipline within psychology. We're really focusing on positive emotions, happiness, joy, optimism, and seeing if there's an increase in positive emotions, what kind of real impact that can have on people's lives. Knowing that there's a mixture of emotions that we all feel. I think one of us will probably talk a little bit about a 1-to-3 ratio at some point. So 1 negative emotion to 3 positive emotions, kind of an ideal factor. So my kind of main takeaway is if the book doesn't cite scientific research, its claims are probably likely falling within the realm of self-help or positive thinking. And so the difference is really we're talking about evidence-based studies that can be re-implemented, they're empirical evidence, and they obviously have lots of applicability to the work that we do in student affairs and higher education. Excellent,
thank you. So, Keith, I was following your Twitter feed and thread up until the show, and you told us that you were going to share a story about your awful day, and I'm intrigued about sharing a story about your awful day on a positive psychology talk. So I'd like actually for each of you, if you wouldn't mind sharing some kind of story you have that has somehow transformed your leadership or your personal life that is related to positive psychology.
Yeah, I love paradigm shifts and paradigm challenges. So one of the most powerful examples for me of positive psychology is this awful day I had a couple of years ago. It was a January day. It was cold. It is snowy. It was really cold. I live in St. Paul, Minnesota. So when I mean cold, I'm like -20. I didn't want to be into work. It was the first day I was back after winter break, and I would spend the day in a retreat that I didn't want to spend my day in. It was about a topic that I wasn't interested in, and I was a little bit hurt by, and I just didn't want to be there. And on my way to work, I ended up bumping into the car in front of me at a stoplight. And as I backed up to get away from that person, someone walking in between my car behind me hit my car to let me know that they were there, used a lot of misogynistic and homophobic curse words to direct at me. The person who I bumped into, there was no damage, but she just didn't know what to do, and so that was a really awkward and awful interaction. I'm not going to be late to this retreat I don't even want to be in. I just try and console myself with a cup of coffee, which is what I drink on my way to work, and it's sort of my me time. My coffee, for reasons I don't understand, is awful. Not like just not good, like it is undrinkable awful. And I'm just off to the worst day. So I get to campus and I finally stop at the coffee shop across from campus. I get a cup of coffee, I come sit down, and the person leading the retreat lets me know that we're going to start the retreat a half hour late. So I've done all this rush and all this anxiety for nothing, and in my head I'm thinking, well, why do I have to rush? But we just go around your schedule, and I'm self-righteous, and it's just terrible. And because I was rushed, I didn't get a chance today. So I said, all right, I'm just going to take these 10 minutes, I'm going to meditate, as I do each morning. And as I sat to meditate, part of my meditation is spending time on gratitude. And as I came to that part of my meditation, I just thought, well, there's nothing to be grateful for today. And then I thought, I get to do this. I get to meditate. This is pretty great. And because my coffee was awful, I had to get a really good cup of coffee, and that's pretty great. And you know, that person who yelled at me and cursed at me, I didn't squish them between my car and the car behind me and ruin their lives and my life. So how awesome is it that I didn't injure somebody? And how great is it that I bumped into the car in front of me and there's no damage to her car and there's no damage to my car, and I just get to go about my day and I don't have to worry about insurance and I don't have to worry about all those things. And I just, in that moment of meditation, changed this awful day, which all of those things are real and happen. But by thinking about them differently, I went from having the worst day that I can remember with nothing to be grateful for to that same reality and having an unbelievable great start to my morning. And I went into the rest of the retreat and the rest of the day thinking, I'm having a great day. How can I keep this going? And that's the power of positive psychology, not denying that I had bad things happen to me, but fostering gratitude and cultivating those positive emotions, which makes me more creative, makes me smarter, makes me more open to diversity, makes my body and my chemistry and my brain completely change to make me better at my job, a better human being, a better family member. So that to me is a great illustration of the power of positive psychology. And I would also add the power of meditation, which is a research-proven positive psychology strategy.
Wow, that is a fabulous story. Maybe we'll come back to that topic of meditation later on in the show. Right now I want to throw it over to Grant. Grant, do you have a story that you could share, how it's impacted your life?
Well, first of all, I just want to acknowledge I also have not hit anybody today with my car, and so I feel pretty good about that.
It's a great day.
But for me, I come back to something that I'm sure many folks out there can identify with, the classic staff meeting. And most of you out there probably have 1, 2, 3 a week that you go to. And how we learn to run these meetings, generally comes that when we're maybe student employees or student workers, so we're in our teens and 20s, we had a young professional a few years older than us who ran meetings, and that became our model and our habit for how maybe we're going to run meetings the rest of our career. And I came to realize a few years ago that in many ways I had some really bad habits when it comes to running meetings. And the single worst habit I've discovered through positive psychology is starting meetings with highs and lows. I can't imagine anything worse than starting meetings with highs and lows now that I've done this research on positive psychology. Yet I did it for probably a decade, and many of you out there probably do it yourselves and maybe did it this morning before joining us for this wonderful experience. Well, what I realize is that through the research is that we tend to weigh negative emotions and negative thoughts and negative information twice as heavily as we weigh positive information or positive emotions. So when you go around a room, whether it's 4 people or 40 people, and everybody checks in with something that's good, and something that's bad, what happens is if each good is a +1 and each bad is a -2, by the end of the check-in, we are at a negative emotional deficit, which means that we are less creative, less thoughtful, less resilient, less engaged as a group. And so what we've done to change our staff meetings is we now start them with celebrations. And so what we do is we talk about whether you're having a good day or a bad day, kind of like Keith's example, what can we be grateful for? What about your life, personal or work, can you celebrate today? So we're only bringing positive emotion into that space. Again, it's not denying that negative things happen, that there are real challenges in people's lives, but when we're trying to be productive and get the most out of that time together, bringing positive emotion and only positive emotion in that space to start sets the whole group up for more success.
Wow, that is a great story, and I will confess I've done the high and low, and actually without reading the books came to that same conclusion, that the sum game sets the mood for the rest of the meeting.
Right.
That's a great example, a great practical example. All right, Heather, you're up. Do you have a story you can share with us?
For sure. I'm going to talk later about what I do in my current job, but I'm going to go back to previous position that I held as the director of a women's center. And we always were talking, I mean, this again goes a little bit back to what Keith was saying around doing social justice work and the resilience that's required in order to maintain a sense of peace and connection and purposefulness about that work. And one of the strategies that we talked about a lot within the Women's Center is identifying what our sphere of control was versus what our sphere of influence was. And how when you identify what's in your sphere of control, really when it comes down to it is the only thing I can control is my own reaction to the situation. So I can let all of this stuff spin out of control, and I can't necessarily change that, but I can change how I choose to react to that situation. When we talked about this, particularly around some of the issues they were facing around sexual assault awareness, women's issues, body image issues, all of the things that kind of pervade our world. And, we get a lot, at the Women's Center, we used to get a lot of really serious stuff brought to our door. And it can be emotionally and physically draining. But when we kind of step back and say, okay, what can we do? How can we contribute to this conversation? And sometimes, when do we need to walk away, too? I think that's another key point, is sometimes making the choice to not engage is the best thing that for all parties involved that you can do. And I think social media has this tendency to pull us in, right, to negative conversations, and you want to keep participating because maybe you started it or you put something out there. The idea is, at what point do you maybe say, I can control, at this point I'm not going to further engage with you. So that's my perspective on that.
Very good. Thank you. So you have read 20-something books, and in presentations you kind of do this rapid-fire sharing from the 20 books. So I'm going to try something, and I'm going to be positive that it's going to work. I have a 30-second timer, and I'm going to ask each of you in a rapid-fire fashion to go through and give us kind of the essence of each of the books. One important lesson or one important research or some kind of takeaway, so that viewers can make an informed decision of whether they might want to explore one of the books that you share here today. So 30 seconds, it'll go red, there'll be a buzzer, maybe we'll take a break halfway through. Are you ready?
Ready.
All right, we're going to start off with Keith, and go.
So the first book that I read, I picked up at Harvard and in their bookstore. It's a book called Happier by Tal Ben-Shahar. It's got a bright yellow cover, and I was just drawn to it totally randomly. What that book taught me is a definition of happiness, and there's lots of them that I still resonate with, that happiness is a combination of in-the-moment pleasure and long-term meaning. So pleasure may be enjoying my meal. Long-term meaning is I love my kids and will get to spend my life with them. Plus, thinking about, so that meaning and pleasure both over the short term and the long term. Boy, that's a lot of pressure with that timer.
I'd crack a joke, but I think I'm next. So
Yeah, go ahead.
So the books I want to focus on are both Strengths Quest and StrengthsFinder 2.0, and a lot of you have used those books. And I think the key takeaway is that in your management of people and development of people, focusing on strengths versus weaknesses, and if you do that, you will increase engagement with them, and you also help them develop their talents and apply their talents to what they do best every day. It is known that if we focus on weaknesses, we actually diminish engagement, and if we focus on strengths, we'll actually increase it. And so I think that's an approach people may think about in their work.
That was good. Okay, I'm doing 2 books, so I think that I should get a little extra. Okay, all right. Daring Greatly by Dr. Brené Brown is a book many of us are familiar with. There's going to be lots of Brené Brown love on the show today. It gets its title from a famous quote by Theodore Roosevelt, which begins with the line, "It's not the critic who counts," and ends with, "If he fails, at least he fails," by Daring Greatly. Our arena might be relationships, work, school. She talks about leading from a place of vulnerability. We'll talk about that later. The other book is The Gifts of Imperfection, also by Brené Brown, presents a decade's worth of work. Approaching life from a point of worthiness and authenticity and belonging versus scarcity. I know I went way over. Sorry.
Oh, I reset the timer for you. I gave you 2:30. You said you had 2 books. All right. All right. Who's up next?
The next one is Positivity by Barbara Fredrickson, and that book is really tons of research. The first half of the book is about the power of positive emotions, how they shape our lives, how they shape our body chemistry, how they shape unmovable things that we used to think are unmovable, our heart rate, our brain waves, all sorts of things, and how we have control over them. And it talks about the heartfelt emotions, and if you can cultivate, the math's a little tricky, but if you can cultivate around 3 heartfelt positive emotions to 1 heartfelt negative emotion, your productivity and performance goes off the charts.
Cool.
And Heather's going to talk about our next book.
Yeah, I'm going to talk about another book by Barbara Fredrickson. It's called Love 2.0, How Our Supreme Emotion Affects Everything We Do, Feel, and Become. Again, more results from her lab work around talking about love as an emotion, not just reserved for our significant other or for our children, immediate family, but for all people who we have micro moments of connection with. And she calls this phenomenon positivity resonance. This actual book I'm going to talk about later because we've infused this into the living learning community that I work in, and I have no idea how much time I have left. Tony, is the timer broken?
No.
Oh, no. Oh, I have 8 seconds. Excellent. So I highly recommend this book. She also talks a lot about meditation, love and kindness meditation, and there's some actual practical tips that you can use and implement today.
So the next books are the Heath brothers, Dan and Cliff, who've done books Switch and Made to Stick. These books are actually really helpful practical tools for folks who want to help influence people's behaviors or their ideas. And one of the key takeaways that we learn in these books is that decisions are often made out of emotion, not out of logic or out of a deliberative process, but our decisions are really emotional. And so when we understand that decisions are emotional or based on emotion, that can help us understand how to best educate people, positively influence people in the workplace, and help guide people towards some of the outcomes we're seeking.
So I'm gonna take a quick thought break there. I actually read Made to Stick, and I really viewed it as a marketing book. And there was a piece at the end that had an acronym. It was SHIF or CHIF. That stood for clever, high quality, innovative, friendly, and fun. And it helped make things more sticky. And we actually came up with a similar thing here at Rutgers called PRIDE. So it was being professional, resourceful, innovative, developmental, and evaluative. And it really set the frame for all the work that we did moving forward. So we're about halfway through our book list. I think it's about time for a quick positivity dance break. Are you guys ready?
Yeah.
Everyone at home, feel free to dance along. Where's the spin, Keith? There it is.
That was awesome.
All right, and we're back. Who's up next? Heather.
Oh, it's me. Okay. So I am talking about Lubomirski, I think is how you pronounce her name's 2 books, The How of Happiness and The Myths of Happiness. In The How of Happiness, she presents years of research about creating a guide to understanding how the elements of happiness can be put into your own hands. She emphasizes the individuality of this process through lots of different workbook exercises, etc. In her other book, The Myths of Happiness, she talks about how even in the midst of life's biggest challenges, we can recognize the upsides of negative experience and become more adaptable. Right on. That was awesome. Okay. Keith.
Yeah, I want to talk about Martin Seligman's book, Flourish. He wrote a previous book, but Flourish is kind of the latest update, and he's kind of the originator of the field of positive psychology, and he really talks about positive psychology. In this book, he defines it as positive emotion, engagement, positive relationships, meaning, and accomplishment and achievement, or PERMA. They've recently started adding vitality into that. But the most transformative thing for me about this book is that we've all heard of post-traumatic stress, but actually post-traumatic growth and resiliency and change is even more common and a powerful experience that is more common than post-traumatic stress. I found that fascinating.
I'm going to cover two quick ones, Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman, as well as Nudge by Thaler and Sustein. And really, these two books are great because they really focus on the intersection between motivation, brain science, behavioral economics, and positive psychology. I think that the important takeaway there is to know that our brains have learned certain biases that get in our way when it comes to decision making and behaviors that can be problematic. And as a result, we don't necessarily make the best choices and set ourselves up for success. One of those, for example, is that Kahneman talks about is the planning fallacy, where it often takes twice as long to do something as we plan for. And so he talks about a strategy moving forward is when you plan a major initiative, you should probably just double the time that you thought you needed to be successful.
All right, I am next. I'm going to talk about Sean Achor's book, The Happiness Advantage, the 7 principles of positive psychology that fuel success, performance, and work before happiness. And he works actually as an academic advisor kind of type at Harvard, or did, and he studied first-year students at Harvard who often talked about how they'll be happy when. And so this whole kind of concept of that happiness should or that success should create happiness is actually, he found, it's the other way around. That the research is opposite. Happiness fuels success. Okay, that's all.
I initially read a book by a blogger, Zen Habits blogger, on the power of less, which is great. But I recently read an even better book about the same thing called Essentialism by Greg McKeown. And if there's anyone who's listening that has ever felt overwhelmed and like they have too many things going on in their life, this is a great book about how you can do less so that you can be more, and the power of setting priorities. It's just a really great, whether it's work or family or health or spirituality, applying that notion of essentialism across the board is phenomenal.
The next book is Making Hope Happen by Shane Lopez. And what the book talks about is how hope increases our level of engagement and resilience and our focus on what we want. And there's really 4 essential elements to being hopeful. One is you have to believe that tomorrow can be better than today, and cultivating that. 2, that believing that I have the power to make that happen, really about having agency. 3, there are multiple pathways to get something done. And 4, normalizing that there will always be obstacles in the way that we have to work around, and that's part of accomplishing anything.
All right.
All right. It's me. I'm going to talk about Arianna Huffington's book, Thrive. Obviously, Arianna Huffington is a journalist, not a researcher, but in this book, Thrive, she summarizes all of the studies that provide evidence that we can thrive if we foster more well-being, wisdom, and wonder in our lives. So it's chock full of personal stories, lots of practical examples. On a personal note, I downloaded the meditation app Buddhify after getting a recommendation, and I use it every day. It's a fabulous meditation app. My unsolicited commercial.
All right, Keith, bring us home.
Oh, you're muted.
All right. So I'm going to talk about a book called Community by Peter Block, and I'm sure he doesn't think of himself as a positive psychologist, but we're talking a lot about the individual. That book really talks about, without naming it, how you can do positive psychology with groups, whether it's families or staffs or campuses or cities, and just a total reframe from a totally different angle. It's an unbelievable, if you're responsible for community development in any way, this will get you to think about it in ways that you've never thought about it before.
Wow, and a few seconds to spare. Well, thank you for that little experiment. That was fun. You did a great job. So you've explored almost all of the books, and I asked you to reserve before the show the ones that were your favorite. So if you can have a little bit more than 30 seconds now, if you'd like to share your favorite book and why it's your favorite. Heather?
All right, so I'm going to talk about Daring Greatly, my favorite book. I'm a huge Brené Brown fan. I had the opportunity to meet her at ACPA last year. It was phenomenal. So I think this book, what it really taught me is about the power of being vulnerable and open and sharing appropriately with people who have earned the right to hear my story in order to lead a more authentic and full life. She tells this story at the beginning of the book about the marble jar. And if you haven't read the book, it's on page 47. And her daughter basically, there's this marble jar at school. When the class is being bad, they take out marbles. She starts using it with her daughter and thinking about who are the people who put marbles in your jar. And we've talked about filling our buckets, all of the different things. I think what's really critical is how this book can be transformative in our work. And so I put a huge plug in for Daring Greatly and all of Brené Brown's book, but this one in particular.
Yeah, we talked about this the other day, and I think for me it's so hard to pick one. Grant suggested I pick the one that's the most salient, and the one that is most salient for me in my life right now is essentialism, because there's so many competing priorities, and the idea that most of my impact on those who I love and care about, and my productivity and my work, comes from a very small percentage of my time, energy, and effort. And if I could expand that, my impact can be greater. So the notion that it has just reminded me daily to choose priorities, and I don't have to do everything. Maybe some people can relate to getting caught up in doing what's immediate and losing sight of what's important. And that book has really helped me constantly ask myself those questions, constantly.
Hey, Grant.
For me, the book, and it's not been mentioned yet, that was really a game changer for me was Mindset by Carol Dweck. And, I think when I was exposed to this book for the first time, I saw a lot of different concepts around positive psychology kind of colliding together within the context of this. And it's really this sense that there's really this almost a binary around how we see intelligence, whether we see it in a fixed way or we see it from a growth perspective. And I can talk more about it, but I think the impact on me personally was that I knew there were parts of my life that I was more growth-oriented. I was more open to learning and growing. I saw myself as a person who could be vulnerable, thinking about Brené Brown, who could make mistakes and be open. And then there were other parts of my life that were not consistent with that, where I was more closed off. I was trying to look good versus trying to learn to get good. And so when I read this book, it really, both personally and professionally, really changed the way I do things. I will also note that this book has completely changed the way I hire staff and train and work with staff. Basically, there are a few qualities I consider to be as important as having a growth mindset when it comes to hiring people and developing people. I know we talk about creating a culture of growth mindset pretty much in just about every staff meeting, supervisory conversation, when we're talking about our team, because basically this idea, if you have a growth mindset, you can go anywhere with that. Whereas you can develop any skill or any talent if you believe that it is possible to develop it.
I recently read that book and loved it and started to incorporate it into a Pachaka-Cha, Angel Got Its Wings,
there it is,
talk for ACPA. And one of the things that I found was interesting, the contrast. It said that people with a fixed mindset said the ideal partner would put them on a pedestal and make them feel perfect and worship them, whereas a person with a growth mindset hoped for a different kind of partner, someone that would see their faults and help to work on them, but also challenge them to become a better person and encourage them to learn new things. And I thought that was it was insightful and made me think about who I surround myself with, both professionally in my personal life as well.
Well, and I think, when I think about that book, I think we all have it within us to be either fixed or growth oriented, and that shows up maybe in different parts of our lives. So when I talk about, for example, hiring folks, I don't think that we all have to have it all figured out. In fact, again, I'm a growth person. I believe we all can grow and evolve. But you have to kind of believe that it's possible to grow at least in some part of your life and then have that become contagious throughout other parts of your life. And I think there are folks who really sometimes feel like that they're either smarter, they're not, and they've got to protect themselves at all costs. And I have seen, once you read this book, you can't help but notice those folks and how they separate themselves from other and how they miss out on a lot of the learning and growth that they can do to set themselves up for personal and professional success.
Great. So we're getting some questions on Twitter, and people are, I'm gonna jump ahead here. People are asking for some ideas on practical tips, strategies. What are some things that we can do on a daily basis to start to infuse all of this research and knowledge that you've acquired?
I would say there's a couple things that at least I'll speak for me that come to mind. I think one certainly is changing your management style to be more strength-based versus weakness-based. And you don't have to know the Strength Finder tool. There are free tools actually out there as well to do strengths. But it's really about a paradigm of really how can we learn from what's worked in the past and apply that in the present and in the future. And so that can easily be done in conversations when a challenge is in front of somebody saying, hey, what worked for you in a previous situation, and how can you apply what worked there to this situation? I think a second one from a leadership perspective is to cultivate a growth mindset. I think it has to come from leaders and managers. And a huge place where that comes is the issue of mistakes. I think it's really easy, and a fixed mindset is driven to hide mistakes, because mistakes are a sign that you're not intelligent, you're not bright, you're not competent. And this goes also back to Brene Brown. I think for leaders to be vulnerable enough to acknowledge mistakes and to share their mistakes can really create a growth mindset environment. And I realize some people have, they may want to be growth-minded, but their boss or their boss's boss is not growth-minded. So you have to live with whatever sphere of influence you have, but I think that's one way to do it. And the last thought I have, and then my colleagues may have some ideas too, is I think we as a field have to let go of some old habits. Again, a lot of the habits we learned, like highs and lows, are things that we learned from another young professional when we were students or young professionals, and are not oftentimes based on research or evidence. They're just kind of what we grew up with and what feels comfortable. And so I think we need to look at some of our practices like that. Another example of that, for example, based on research, is around how you run conversations in meetings. When you're trying to get feedback from a group, one of the worst things that you can do is throw a question out and start taking answers. Because what we know is the first person who speaks is going to anchor the rest of the thoughts of the group and actually block their thinking and creativity. So the first thing you want to do is first have positive energy in the room. Secondly, give them the prompt and let everybody write down all of their thoughts for a minute or two, and then have the conversation. What we also know about meetings is what people remember from meetings are the peak emotional moment of the meeting, and they remember how they finish. So as leaders of meetings, we need to make sure that we have positive peak emotional moments within meetings that people will remember, and especially around the most important content. And then we also need to make sure that no matter what we do, we try to end those meetings on a positive note, because then the energy they take away from that meeting will be positive, and they will remember the content in a positive setting. So those are just a couple of, I think, kind of old habits that people could maybe let go of or tried some different things based on the research around these things.
Can I jump in? I have a couple of thoughts. Building on what Grant said about strengths, I think one of the other ways that I've seen it used really successfully is in a team environment where everybody does the Strengths Finder inventory or some other tool, and then we use that in order to understand what everybody else is good at. So you build a team, and it's not meant to on the hiring end, but really once you establish as a team, what are the things that X person is good at that Y person, maybe is not as good at? And then you know better as a manager how to help each of those individuals that you supervise work within their area of strength. I think that's really critical. The other piece that Grant said about making mistakes, I think, is really great. I'm in a book club where we're reading a book called Mistakes I Made at Work, and it's the stories of 25 influential women reflecting on how they got it wrong. And I didn't think about that book as a part of this until you mentioned that today. But it's really about how we can fail forward, right? And Eric Qualman talks about this, using the lessons of positive psychology to turn mistakes into learning opportunities that then can create a growth opportunity versus oh, I did that wrong, I'm a failure, here comes the shame and the guilt. So that's what I'd add.
And I'd add that you create a culture where you celebrate those mistakes. You don't make them and go, oh shoot, I hope nobody notices. You celebrate them, right? And if you as a leader walk in and go, here's what I want to celebrate to start our staff meeting off. Boy, last week I met with a student and I totally took the wrong approach. But I want to celebrate that because I'm never going to take that approach again. It just didn't work. So I really am excited about the learning and how that's going to go forward. People will look at you funny a little bit, but if you really mean that, it can be really transformative for the culture. So celebrating mistakes is, I think, how you really do that and change things. A couple things I would add. What I focus on, this is not super concrete, but I want to be clear as a leader that I provide a very clear vision so everybody knows where we're going. And then I want people to figure out how they are going to get there. Because I don't want them to get there how I would, because they're probably not very good at being Keith, because I know I'm not very good at being Tony Doody. So how do they use that path? And so when they say, I know exactly what I need to accomplish, but I have complete freedom to figure out how I'm going to get there, that means they're energized, they're engaged, and they're using their strengths. The other thing, the avalanche of research on meditation is just bonkers. It's like you should sleep, you should eat well, you should drink enough water, and you should meditate. It is just a no-brainer. And for me, meditation has completely changed my life. I started noticing that when I would come home at night and my partner would say, you didn't meditate today, did you? If she could notice at 6 o'clock at night that I was impatient with our kids, that was a powerful indicator of what that 10 minutes at 6 o'clock in the morning was for my whole day. And I still experience full life, but everything is just turned down. I still get frustrated, but instead of a 9, it's a 6.5, and I can roll with that. So just the power of meditation makes me a far better leader when I take time to do that.
Go ahead.
And I notice it, and apparently people around me notice it when I don't.
Yeah. And I was going to say, and you don't have to necessarily take lots of extra time, too. I mean, I think one of the things I really like about the Buddhify app is you can build meditation into what you're currently already doing. So are you just waking up? Are you traveling? Are you eating? Are you taking a work break? Are you having difficult emotions? And you can pick the meditation that maybe would help best get you to the end point in the context of the environment that you're in. So, cool.
That was gold. You should all write a book on strategies, practical strategies toward positive psychology. I'm going to come back to the topic in a moment. Zeb Davenport on Twitter asked a question. You talked about, I guess this is for Grant, but anyone can answer. You talked about a fixed mindset. What are some practical strategies that we can use as leaders to help staff get out of a fixed mindset?
There are a couple of things, and again, all three of us, and all four of us really, I think, know this work and can comment, but I think the first one is stop telling people how smart they are. Part of where a fixed mindset is developed is when you're constantly telling people you're smart, you're intelligent, you're bright, you're wise, because you make it seem like it's a fixed, that they are those things and they're not moving, and instead acknowledge effort. The willingness to learn lessons, the acknowledgement of hard work, of being resilient and pushing through tough times. So part of it is just even where we acknowledge and recognize people has to shift. I think secondly, I do think it comes back again to role modeling. I think we have to, as leaders, role model that willingness to admit mistakes. I tell my staff, as a leader, people want you to be, to believe in you. But you need to also acknowledge when you don't know something. So I introduced a concept to my team called being confidently unaware. That you want to project that you are comfortable that you don't know it. And I think that's a dynamic that we can kind of be honest about and say, as a leader, it is okay that I don't know something and I need to go find it or go learn it, as opposed to making up an answer or trying to fumble my way and fake through it because I think it's my job to know that information. And so I think role modeling and leadership there is also another strategy that I think really would help. And again, I don't know if my colleagues have other ideas as well.
I can add it. Go ahead, Keith.
I just think that notion of I'm increasingly impressed with uncertainty. Whenever someone tells me they know exactly what this person thinks or how they view things or what's going to happen, I now view that as less smart. When someone says, I'm pretty sure, the uncertainty, and I think the Zen principles overlapping with positive psychology is something I'm really into. And the Buddhists would say knowing is the end of learning. As soon as we know something, we stop asking questions, we stop seeing it, we stop learning about it, because we know it, we can move on. As soon as I know what a pen looks like, I don't think about that anymore. But maybe I don't know what a pen looks like. It could be anything. I could learn a lot about that. And we have such a fixed mindset of students, usually because we feel out of control, and we're trying to control and predict and put people in little boxes so they behave the way I think they're going to behave so I can get some control around my life. And I think we got to push beyond that.
Yeah. I just want to add one other piece. It's so interesting that this book came up as a part of this show today, because I just finished reading Tag's book for my Student Affairs doctoral program class on teaching and learning. And he cites Carol Dweck all over it, because he really talks about how we see students. Do we see students as having a fixed ability or intelligence, or do we see them as having a malleable, fluid, and changeable level of intelligence? And so how we approach teaching and learning, not only within the context of the classroom, but broader in co-curricular opportunities, has a lot to do with how our perspective on the potential for those students to learn. And they talk about it as an entity view versus an incremental view, but this is basically Carol Dweck's work. So,
two more quick thoughts on mindset. I think one is that, as I mentioned before, I think there is a level of vulnerability that comes with having a growth mindset. And so I think I see how complementary the work done by Brene Brown and Carol Dweck are, because you have to have a willingness to put yourself out there around making mistakes and around the learning process, and that can be vulnerable depending on your role. I also just want to acknowledge that for some people, based on their identity or the environment that they work in, the openness to make mistakes and the grace giving in the learning process is different. And so I think, the research I think on growth mindset is very sound, and that's not in dispute. But I do think some folks are given less space to live out their growth mindset, and I think it's just another reason why and how people are hurt through injustice and oppression, and why creating inclusive workspaces where a growth mindset can be fostered is so critical, and really allowing people to maximize their potential and continue to grow and learn in the work they're doing.
It's funny. So it keeps coming back to that theme of, I think Carol in Mindset wrote a whole chapter debunking this concept of the natural born talent, right? And going and showing some historical examples of folks who we see to be unfallible and just naturally gifted, and it just doesn't line up with the truth and the number of hours that they put in to become the role models or the heroes that they are. So we asked a few people to share with us what their tips were, and I want to share one from Kimberly White. She said the most important application tips for staying positive that she's used are staying humble, counting your blessings, and living out your values. And we've heard a few of you start to talk about the importance of articulating and modeling, particularly from a leadership perspective, your values. So I have a note here from earlier in the conversation, and Ray Gasser actually asked about this earlier in the show.
Is he trolling again?
He's like the #1 fan of Higher Ed Live. It's great. So it comes back to this concept of meditation, and I will admit, Keith, when you say meditation, I go immediately to the Zen Buddhism definition, at least in my head, of what that is, but it probably is broader, right? I almost think I'm meditating when I'm mowing my lawn behind my house. Like, what is meditate? What is it?
Well, there's a lot of ways that you can define meditation, and trying to make it one specific thing that you can get right or wrong is sort of getting out of that mindset is the point of meditation. So meditation can be focused thinking, oftentimes thinking about just our breath. I'm going to breathe in, I'm going to breathe out. I'm going to breathe in, I'm going to breathe out. And just thinking about that for 10 minutes is really hard to do. I think meditation and mindfulness are different. So mindfulness is a little different than meditation. Mindfulness is not achieving nirvana while you're doing the dishes. It is achieving nirvana by only doing the dishes and not thinking about what do you have to pack for this kid's lunches tomorrow, what do you have to do for those other things. I think Russell Simmons, who's a media mogul and does all sorts of things, was once asked at a large conference how he does all of this. How does he fit it in? How does he take on all these responsibilities? And I often feel overwhelmed by all my responsibilities. And Russell Simmons said, I don't do shit before I meditate. And I think about that whenever I'm rushed, I'm in a hurry, I don't have time to meditate. I think my whole day is going to be better if I take time to meditate. Mm-hmm. So there's lots of apps. People on Twitter have mentioned Headspace, which is a great free 10 episodes of meditation. They're only 10 minutes long. You can sign up. Oprah and Deepak Chopra have 21-day meditation challenges. You can YouTube meditation and find YouTube videos that'll walk you through it. You can walk and meditate. You can just sit and think about it, and you won't be good at it. That's why they call it practice. And I've been meditating for 3 years now, and it's still really challenging to sit and actively do nothing. Not passively do nothing, but actively do nothing.
Wow, and it certainly today is such a more noisy environment than it was even a few years ago. So as you were talking about doing the dishes, I can think of the multitude of conversations running inside my head while I do the dishes each night, and I'm not in the moment. I'm not paying attention to my surroundings and the environment. So it's a point well taken. Now, you have had this tremendous success at conferences, and why do you think there's such an interest in this from the profession?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would just say is I think people are hungry for living their lives differently. So this includes how they do their work. There's a lot of cynicism. There's a lot of despair. I think what we found when we began reading these books was there's an opening, right? There's a place where we can add this to our professional lives from our personal lives. I think the other piece that's really interesting is that there's lots of talk about how student affairs and higher education is really an interdisciplinary practice. But do we value and think about the discipline of positive psychology as a text, right, for student affairs leaders? And so I think the other piece for us is that we each have a unique story, but we have a common beginning point. We were at the Colorado State University SAHI program from '98 to 2000. It's a very practically based program, and so what we really bring to this presentation, which I hope is useful for folks, are some of these practical tips about how you can apply these perspectives to your everyday life.
Anyone else? Thoughts on the popularity?
I think it's a tool. I think people are looking for ways to do more. And I think, and to do better, and to be better at what they're doing. And I think this is a way of understanding the tools that you have and the tools that others that you work with have, and getting the most out of those tools. And I think it is, I think, Heather says, a hunger to learn about these, to learn about new ways of doing things, and to rethinking about old ways that we have done things. And I think it's really appealed because I think when people hear the examples and the suggestions, it resonates with them around, I have done that and that hasn't worked, and maybe there is a different path, and this research can maybe steer us in that direction.
Yeah, I'd also add, I think that when I see people sitting in those chairs in those conference sessions, or standing or sitting, they want to live their lives differently. They want to be in the world differently, and that's about how they lead. That's about how they connect with people. That's about how they drive home. That's about how they wash the dishes. That's about getting enough sleep. They want to live their lives differently, and we live in a busy world where there are things coming at me through my phone constantly if I let it. And there's also a culture of cynicism. I think we live in a culture where you prove how smart you are by how you can take other people down. And that self-righteousness and that destruction, I think, is mostly about meeting my own ego needs and not really about making the world a better place, making the world a place I live in. I think we've mentioned social justice a few times. I think it's a difference between doing anti-oppression work and doing liberation work. And if you think about those differently, one's a positive psychology approach, and doing liberation work, you go about it in a different way, and you're a different being in the world, and you connect with other people differently than if you're against something, which we're all against oppression. But how do you make that shift? And I think people are just eager for a different way of being in the world, and that's what they gravitate toward.
Wow, I could listen to all of you talk all day. We're ending nearing the end of the show. I just want to do a quick check-in and ask what are you working on in 30 seconds or less. I won't hit the timer. Where are you appearing? What are you working on over the next few months?
Well, I'll just state that I'm not going to conference this year. Hopefully, back at it again next year. But I am a doctoral candidate, and so I'm actually looking at the intersection of positive psychology and social justice as tools that can fit together. And I'm hoping, in the course of the next year to 18 months, I can move that process forward.
Excellent.
Yeah, and you know, Heather and I and two of our colleagues, Tracy Davis and Vern Kilbasa, are doing a session at ACPA, kind of combining this. It's going to be called the Zen Difference. We're going to combine positive psychology, Zen philosophies, and sustainability, and talk about how we can stop thinking about ourselves as separate and how we can think of ourselves as being part of a one, and how that changes our perspective around leadership, around who we are, and how we do sustainability and social justice and environmental work. So we'll be doing that at ACPA. It's called the Zen Difference if people are interested.
Yeah.
When is that?
That is on Friday. Let me make sure I get this right. It is on Saturday, March 7th at 2 p.m.
Excellent. Put it on your calendars, folks.
I'm also presenting at ACPA several sessions, and the one that's probably most applicable to this conversation is one that I'm doing with my supervisor, the director of the RISE program. It's called Leading, playing off the word lead and sustainability, Leading and Loving Where You Live When Environmental Sustainability is Not Enough, where we really talk about the importance of infusing love and community into sustainability work. And this is based on the concepts of Fredrickson, Broaden and Build theory in the book Positivity and Love 2.0. That session is happening also on Saturday at 11 a.m. called Leading and Loving Where You Live.
All right, I'm giving notice to the folks listening in from the ACPA office. Make sure you have rooms big enough to satisfy these superstars here. They keep selling out their rooms. You need bigger rooms. Thank you, everyone, for being on today's show, for being such good sports. I think the Dance Jam will have to be a regular part of the show moving forward, although I can't quite picture all the guests doing that.
Agreed.
Heather and I will be returning in March live from ACPA in Tampa, and we'll actually start off with a tag team show that is a preview starting on March 3rd at noon. Then I'll be interviewing a series of special guests, including provocateur John Dugan as part of an idea generator panel, and Heather will be taking it home with a show featuring Jillian Kinsey and George Koo. Again, quite a cast. And I'll be there on Saturday evening at 6:39 doing a Pachaka-cha, and forgot its wings, on the topic of curiosity, chaos, and a kid in a candy store. And it actually follows a lot of the conversations that we had today, and I promise you it will be one for the books. You will all love it. So please find me on Twitter for more information and details of upcoming shows. Until then, my name is Tony Doody. Thanks for tuning in. I hope you have a glorious glass half full day. Take care, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Tony, thank you.